second main thing I want to talk about is the 6 basic human movements. And depending on what you look at or where you're reading, you may see a different number of these, but I come from the StrongFirst world. Again, I have their shirt on today, and they have this list, which is both applicable to all sports, but also to all your aspects of life. And that's why they call it the basic human movements, because this makes up all the movements we do in our day. And they are the push, the pull, the squat, the hinge, the carry, and the rotation. So again, we'll kind of go into each one of those. And most of these are going to be familiar. A push, most people will think like a bench press. And again, I'm doing one with kettlebells here. This is what they call a floor press, but again, it's basically a bench press. You could do it with no equipment, and that's like a push-up, for instance. There's all different kinds of that. And in a sports application, you're probably not going to be pushing someone away from you unless you're like wrestling, MMA, maybe some kinds of martial arts where you're trying to push your opponent away, or like football where you're on the line and you're trying to push the other person away. But we use it all the time in our daily tasks. We're pushing the lawnmower, we're pushing the shopping cart, we're pushing the stroller, we're pushing furniture across the room, or anything like that. So anything dealing with kind of the front of the torso, it could be a push in front of you, it could be pushing something overhead. A lot of times that's called a press, but it's still considered a push. Anything like that, those apply to sports and our daily lives. Then the opposite is the pull, so that's the back. So again, here I'm doing a pull-up, so that's considered a body weight motion. It could be a bent over row if you have barbells, or any kind of exercise where you're using your back and pulling. And again, you can do that in every kind of sport where you're pulling someone or pulling something, especially if you're doing like a tug of war or something is a great example where you're pulling, but also in daily life, quite often if you're starting the lawnmower, you have to pull the cord hard enough and fast enough in order to get that engine to kick in. You're pulling doors open, you're sliding doors closed, you're, again, pulling chairs out, you're pulling all the time. And it doesn't need to be heavy. It's still a fundamental basic movement. Next is the squat. And I'm going to compare the squat to the hinge because a lot of people don't know the difference. They may be familiar with the squat as an exercise, which here I'm doing it with kettlebells. Again, you could do it with barbells. CrossFit has made the front squat much more popular, where you're squatting with a barbell or kettlebells in front of you as opposed to on your back. But regardless, the squat is the hips going down and ideally going below the knees. So CrossFit, again, I reference it a lot because my brother and I talk a lot about it since he does it. In CrossFit, they call it an ass to grass squat. So again, dropping your hips as low as you possibly can. But again, it's a fundamental movement. So anytime you're sitting down on anything or standing up from anything, that is a squat movement. A lot of times people are gonna pick stuff up by getting into a squat, or you're gonna have to squat down to get under something or what have you. So the more you can work on these fundamental movements, regardless of whether you're using weights or not, the better they're gonna carry over into your daily life and being able to do these regardless of whether it has a sports performance or not. So to contrast the squat, we have the hinge. Now the difference is in the squat, as I said, the hips go down and they go ideally below the knees. Well, in the hinge, the hips go back and they stay above the knees. So most people, when they think of a hinge, they'll think of like a deadlift or something like that. And there's all kinds of ways to do deadlifts, whether you're using a barbell or not, 2 legs, 1 leg, what have you. But, and I know James will know this, but also doing things like the kettlebell swing or a clean or a snatch, all of those are a big hip thrust movement. And hip thrusts or hinge positions, especially like in things like football or even sprinting, an athletic stance where you're kind of bringing your hips back, or people who are getting ready to catch a ball, like in the outfield, they'll get into that like wide feet, hips back, so they can spring up and jump themselves into a fast run. That is a hinge movement. Quite often, like if you're going to move a couch or you're going to pick a heavy box up, you're going to bring your hips back in order to get yourself down to pick that up. So it's very applicable for picking up heavy objects from the floor, again, regardless of whether it's a barbell or it's a piece of furniture that you need to move. So the last two are going to be quite a bit less common. Dan John, who is an Olympic athlete, he is a world-renowned strength coach. He works with Olympians. He works with a lot of professional teams. He's one of the best-known strength coaches in the world and has been since the 70s. He's predominantly an Olympic thrower and a track athlete. He puts carries at the #1 exercise for total body strength and conditioning over any other, to include squats or deadlifts or anything, because they're so applicable not only to every single sport, but to every human movement. So most people at some point, they're going to be carrying babies, they're going to be carrying groceries, they're going to be carrying backpacks, they're going to be carrying, again, you know, we just moved, so I keep referencing moving furniture. You're going to pick up a chair and bring it across the room. Anytime you eat something, you pick it up and you carry it. Again, it doesn't matter how heavy these things are. We're doing these things because they're basic human movements. They're going to do them all day, every day, in all these ways. And learning how to do things like carries. I mean, have you ever seen kids, they take their book bag and it's all full of tons of stuff and they put it over one shoulder and then they're walking around like this all the time because they think it's cool to have it only on one strap, but they're not carrying it in a safe manner. They're hunching their back and they're twisting. So learning how to do things with good structure, especially with like weights, it's really easy to just pick up anything that has some weight in it and learn how to carry them properly, will cross over not only to sport, but again, in real life. So learning how to bend yourself down, whether it's bending your knees or bending at the waist or hinging or whatever it is, and picking something up without injuring yourself. You know, how many people know someone who's like, oh, I tweaked my back, I went to pick up the thing and I hurt myself. So learning how to do carries properly will serve you well. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a sports connotation or not. We don't want someone to end up on the couch for 6 weeks because they pulled their back because they didn't know how to carry something properly. And then the last one, which is probably the least well known, is rotation. So again, doing one arm or one leg movements, you know, here I have a weight in one side. So I was going to be doing a one-armed carry, basically. So learning how to walk with a weight in one hand. And again, just like those kids with the backpack, I'm not going to be moving over because I have weight in one hand and I don't have it in the other. I'm going to keep myself balanced and braced. So it doesn't matter how much weight I have in one hand or the other, if the weights don't match or whatever. I'm learning how to move without twisting or rotating. And the reason that's so important is learning how to resist those rotations and movements enable us to rotate and move when we want to. And every single sport has a rotation. It doesn't matter if you're doing a backhand in tennis, you're swinging a baseball bat, you're swinging a golf club, or you're simply throwing or catching a ball. Pretty much every single sport involves one of those movements, and every single one of those is a rotation. Think of just boxing or any kind of fight sport. You're going to spin or twist your hips really fast in order to rotate your body so that that blow can come out. Or the opposite, if you're going to block, you need to turn and rotate your hips, you need to turn and rotate your shoulders. So all that comes from the mobility and flexibility of being able to move well, but also of building up this rotation so that you can protect your body from injury as well as have that movement pattern established. So again, sports application, real life application.